October 21, 1600. A valley in central Japan before dawn. 160,000 men stand in the fog, barely able to see 20 paces ahead. East and west. Two visions of Japan's future. When the mist clears, one side will cease to exist. The battle will last 6 hours. Its outcome will last 265 years. This is Sekigahara. 2 years earlier, Toyotomi Hideyoshi had died, leaving a 5-year-old heir and no plan. His council of 5 regents, the most powerful lords in Japan, was supposed to govern together. Instead, they immediately began positioning for dominance. At the center of the conflict, Tokugawa Ieyasu, the most powerful lord, and Ishida Mitsunari, Hideyoshi's fiercely loyal administrator. One wanted power. The other wanted to stop him. Ishida Mitsunari was brilliant, incorruptible, and almost universally disliked. He had served Hideyoshi with total dedication, keeping meticulous records, managing logistics, enforcing rules. But his rigid perfectionism made enemies of the very generals whose swords he needed. When he tried to have Ieyasu arrested in 1600, 7 of those generals sided against him. The Western Army was born fractured. By autumn 1600, Japan had split. The Western Army, nominally defending the Toyotomi heir, gathered under Mitsunari at Osaka. The Eastern Army marched under Ieyasu. The deciding factor would not be numbers. Both sides fielded roughly equal forces. It would be loyalty. And in the Sengoku age, loyalty was always for sale. The Western Army seized the strategic initiative first. Mitsunari's forces occupied the high ground around the Sekigahara Valley, a narrow corridor between mountain ranges on the road between East and West Japan. Whoever controlled Sekigahara controlled the country. The Western generals took the hills. They built defensive positions. On paper, they had the stronger hand. Ieyasu's Eastern Army arrived at Sekigahara on the evening of October 20th, exhausted from a forced march through rain. Ieyasu studied the terrain and knew he was at a disadvantage. The Western forces held higher ground on 3 sides. A frontal assault would be costly. But Ieyasu had a weapon the terrain could not neutralize. Months of secret correspondence. Betrayal. Carefully prepared. Among the Western generals, one man was not what he appeared. Kobayakawa Hideaki commanded 15,000 troops on a hill called Matsuoyama, a position that dominated the entire battlefield. He was 20 years old, impulsive, and deeply uncertain. Ieyasu had contacted him weeks before and received a private assurance. But assurances from anxious young men are fragile things. Dawn broke cold and thick with fog. Neither army could see the other. For 2 hours, both sides waited in eerie silence. Then, around 8 in the morning, The fog began to thin. The armies came into view simultaneously, and the guns opened. Arquebus volleys crackled across the valley. Arrows flew. The Battle of Sekigahara had begun. The fighting was immediate and ferocious. Eastern General Fukushima Masanori crashed into the western forces of Ukita Hideye in the valley center. Both sides suffered. The western flanks held their positions. For 2 hours, the battle was inconclusive. Mitsunari watched from his headquarters on a hill. The plan was working, if Kobayakawa stayed loyal. On Matsuoyama Hill, Kobayakawa Hideaki did not move. His 15,000 troops sat motionless while the battle raged below. Minutes passed, then an hour. Mitsunari's generals began to send frantic messengers, attack the eastern flank. Kobayakawa ignored them. Ieyasu, watching from his command post, grew impatient. He made a decision that took extraordinary nerve. Ieyasu ordered his arquebusiers to fire warning shots directly at Kobayakawa's position. A threat. Move now or be treated as an enemy. It was a calculated gamble. If Kobayakawa took offense and charged the Eastern Army instead, the battle was lost. Kobayakawa hesitated for one final moment. Then he drew his sword and pointed it down the hill. 15,000 men began to run. Kobayakawa's troops smashed into the Western Army's flank. The impact was catastrophic. Then the domino fell. Wakisaka Yasuharu, Ogawa Suketada, Akaza Naomasa. General after general who had made secret promises to Ieyasu turned their weapons on their own allies. The Western Army, already under pressure from the front, was now being destroyed from within. Mitsunari watched his army disintegrate from his command hill. Nothing could be done. The western formations broke. Soldiers fled into the surrounding mountains. Commanders abandoned their positions. In under an hour, an army of 100,000 had ceased to function. Mitsunari himself fled, on foot, alone, into the forest. The battle was over by noon. Ishida Mitsunari hid in a peasant's hut for 3 days, disguised as a commoner. He was betrayed, fittingly, by a man he had once insulted. Captured, he was paraded through the streets of Kyoto and publicly executed on November 6th, 16 days after the battle. He refused to eat food offered before his death, saying he needed to keep his strength to die with dignity. Even at the end, he was meticulous. Ieyasu's victory was total, but measured. He did not rampage, he calculated. 87 daimyo lost their domains entirely. Others were reduced, relocated, or stripped of coastal territories. New lords, loyal to Tokugawa, were placed at strategic positions across the country. In 3 months, Ieyasu had redrawn the map of Japan. The process was so thorough, it would last for centuries. Not all Western lords were destroyed. Those who surrendered quickly, or whose defection had been secured in advance, were spared or lightly punished. The Shimazu clan of Kyushu fought their way out of the encirclement and escaped. Ieyasu chose not to pursue them. Practical politics, not revenge, governed everything. Japan needed to function. Ieyasu needed it to function under him. One question remained unresolved. Osaka Castle still stood. Inside, Toyotomi Hideyori, now 7 years old, was technically Ieyasu's ward. Ieyasu had sworn to Hideyoshi to protect him. He kept that oath for 15 years. Osaka Castle would become the last act, the final necessary violence that completed what Sekigahara had begun. But that is another story. Sekigahara was decided before it was fought. The real battle was the months of letters, promises, and bribes that preceded October 21st. Ieyasu did not win on the battlefield. He won in the negotiating rooms, in the private messengers, in the patient accumulation of commitments from men who would switch sides when the moment came. The fighting lasted 6 hours. The preparation took years. Today, the Sekigahara battlefield is a quiet plain in Gifu Prefecture. Visitors walk among rice fields where 160,000 men once fought. Monuments mark the positions of each commander. The site where Kobayakawa hesitated before his charge still draws pilgrims debating whether he was a traitor or a pragmatist. A single morning in 1600, still being argued about today. Sekigahara closed the Sengoku period, a century of war that had torn Japan apart. What followed was Pax Tokugawa, 2.5 centuries of enforced peace, controlled trade, and frozen social hierarchy. Japan turned inward. The samurai traded swords for brushes. The world outside moved on without them. Until one morning in 1853, when 4 black ships appeared in Edo Bay, and everything changed again. That story is next.